I thought I would start out by reading you a story that I think captures this biodynamics of love in the childbearing year. I'm taking the image that we have on the cover of our packets of the tree, and I think one branch of our tree is pre and perinatal work and the relational field that is so a part of both our work as craniosacral therapists, and even I want to invite you into considering an even broader relational field if you're working with babies and their families. So the story I'm going to read is called Song of Spirit, and it's a story that comes from Jack Kornfield's book called A Path with Heart. And the story goes like this. There is a tribe in East Africa in which the art of true intimacy is fostered even before birth. In this tribe, the birth date of a child is not counted from the day of its birth or even the day of conception, as in most village cultures. For this tribe, the birth date comes from the first time the child is thought of in its mother's mind. Aware of her intention to conceive a child with a particular father, the mother goes off to sit alone under a tree. There she sits and listens until she can hear the song of the child she hopes to conceive. Once she has heard it, she returns to the village and teaches it to the man she hopes to be the father of her child. And they learn to sing it together as they make love, inviting the child to join them. After the child is conceived, she sings it to the baby growing in her womb. Then she teaches it to the old women and the midwives of the village, so that throughout labor and at the miraculous moment of birth itself, the child is greeted with its song. After birth, all of the villagers learn the song of their new member and sing it to the child whenever the child may fall, hurt itself in some way, or also in times of triumph and celebration, in rituals and in initiations. This song becomes part of the marriage ceremony when the child is grown, and at the end of life, his or her loved ones will gather around the deathbed and sing the song for the last time. I love this story because I really feel like it captures the relational field and the relational field that goes out from that embryo, from that fetus growing in the mother's womb. So I'm going to talk a little bit more, slightly more scientifically about that relational field. So as prenates, newborns up to 18 months of age, we are in training to develop and refine our capacity to love and to regulate our autonomic nervous system. And that happens in the field of our parents, or our mom and her partner, or whatever the social emotional environment that we're growing our body in. And I'm going to talk in terms of mother, father, but I want to state right in the beginning that I'm including families of many different compositions. If I say every time mother, father, or partner, or significant other, it can get a little cumbersome. So I'm going to use the terms mother, father with the awareness that sometimes it's two moms, sometimes it's two fathers who are adopting a child, or many other combinations. So, as the slide says, our very early prenatal, our birth, and that first 18 months really affects the level of anxiety in our system and our basic response to connection. How do we come into relationship? How do we stay in relationship? How do we move out of relationship? That transition of how do we come together, how do we go apart. And the mothering, which isn't gender specific, it's who is our basic caregiver, hour after hour, day after day, once we're born, that continues to create that oxytocin response, which is called the love hormone. And that response lets us know that we're safe and we're lovable. And if we have internalized by the time we're 3 months old, I am safe in this world, I'm lovable, that contributes to the optimum growth of not only our entire body, but specifically our brain, our autonomic nervous system. So there really is no such thing as a baby. As Windicott called it, there's only a mother baby, which is one unit. And what we understand more and more is it's not even a mother baby. It's a mother baby in a particular social, emotional environment. It comes down to, it's all about the relational field that is supporting the development of this baby. So we can think about it as, the baby is the inner body here, the mother is the outer body, and whatever the family and that extended family or social emotional environment is really the social body that's directly impacting how that baby is developing in the womb, and once it's a born baby, how it's developing, especially in that first 18 months. So I'm really saying couples create a relational field together that holds all three hearts. So the triad during pregnancy is the baby in the womb, and I'm using dyad, but as I said, it could be a different combination that is holding that baby. And what those assets are in terms of emotional regulation and physiology is contributing to how this baby is developing. Is there a feeling of love and safety between the people in that social body around the infant growing in the womb, or not? And each partner's well-being really rests in the other. Even as adults, our nervous systems are designed to be co-regulated with at least one other person. And if you travel to cultures that still have that tribal flavor, you really observe that happening not just with primary couple relationship, but with the whole community. I was saying recently, I spent time in Bali quite a bit, and even there, you never see teenage boys walking by themselves. They are always touching. They've always got their arm around each other. They've holding hands. I would go for a walk in the morning, and women would come out of their houses. We don't speak the same language. We don't know each other. They'd start walking along beside me, and pretty soon they would take my hand, and we'd be walking along holding hands together for a while as a way of being in relationship. So that's totally affecting that embryo, that growing fetus's ability to come into this place of developing an optimal brain and nervous system. So we can really think of the baby as being held in that circle of love, in that heart. And we can also imagine that couple being held by their social emotional environment in even a larger heart, going out and going out. This is a Balinese baby that I took a photo of. So from preconception onwards, and it really is preconception, we've all had a taste of what epigenetics is doing to our genome and our development of our brain and our nervous system. And we now know what happened to our great-grandmothers and great-grandfathers is affecting us as we're growing our bodies. So our capacities to express health in our system, our personality, our emotional temperament, even our power for higher thought is happening in this crucial period of time. So these babies are really listening to us even before conception, when they're simply an egg in our mother's ovary or the precursor of a sperm in our father's testes, about what this world is like, what this environment is like, and they're adjusting their genome to meet that environment. So by 24 weeks, they're already responding and communicating really directly with the woman who's carrying them. They are responding exactly the nanosecond. It isn't actually response. It's that the mother baby is one being. When the baby's awake, the minute the mother begins speaking, the nanosecond, the baby begins moving their body in a dance, in direct synchrony with the mother's voice. That's how we learn our first language. We're practicing. Even before our ears develop, we're taking the vibration, especially through our bones, in that exact movement with our mother's voice and its emotional tone. Amazing. If our parents are arguing, our nervous system is responding to that arguing. And many of you may have seen at various conferences even videos where, you know, the baby, I've seen one where the baby is literally pushing back against the back wall of the uterus, or another one where it's an Italian one where the baby goes into a huge startle response as soon as there's a crash, where the father in that video has raised his voice during an ultrasound, and you see the baby's response. Now, if that's happening often, that's being coded into the baby's nervous system. This is not a safe world. We also know now that by this second half of pregnancy, that the baby in the womb is able to directly communicate with the mother. And if the mother is able to sit, be still, both she communicate to the baby and she actually listen to the baby, that the baby can communicate even very specific physiological information to her. I've heard this twice actually with the same issue, that a woman who was working with listening to her baby kept, and this woman was planning a home delivery, kept getting a message from her baby, you need an ultrasound and we need a cesarean section. She was like, what? That is not part of my plan. But the baby kept communicating that to her very strongly. And finally, she went and had an ultrasound. She hadn't had an ultrasound in her pregnancy. She was expecting to have this totally natural, no involvement kind of pregnancy and birth. It turned out that the umbilical cord was only about this long, and if she had gone into labor, both she and her baby would have been at risk, and actually probably both their lives were saved by this ultrasound and the cesarean section. I actually have direct experience of that with a family that I worked with, and at 27 weeks, the mom woke up in the middle of the night with this feeling, something's wrong, the baby's telling me something's wrong, we have to go to the hospital right now. She had to wake up her 2-year-old, wake up her husband, jump in the car, having no idea what was going on, nothing showing on the outside, drove 20 minutes to the hospital at high speed, and she and her baby had exactly the same thing, really short umbilical cord, and the baby had moved in such a way that the cord was torn, and she was bleeding internally, and the baby, they did an emergency C-section, was about 5 minutes from the time they realized what was happening, and the baby had already lost about 50% of his blood. And because she listened just like that, and they took action, they are both great. And I got to see them because when he was about 2, they were going in the aquatic center down the water slide, and he was partway down the water slide in a tunnel, very like a birth canal, and he just started screaming and freaked out, and they were like, oh, they had heard that I work with babies with birth trauma, and they came, and it was very interesting working with that little guy. But that just shows how much communication is really going on. So we know now that whatever the particular attachment style of the mother, her relational style, if we do what's called the adult attachment interview, when the mother is 18 weeks pregnant, that is a strong, strong predictor of what the attachment style will be between that baby in the womb and the mother at 1 year. So as craniosacral therapists, our support of that mom during pregnancy is like gold in the bank. That if we can support her And this is the part where I'm asking you to stretch yourself a little bit. Her partner, to not just think of, I'm working with this pregnant woman, but to think of, I'm working with the couple and I'm working with the larger field. When I'm seeing a pregnant woman, I always try to see the partner. If the partner exists, I always try to have at least one appointment, and preferably 2 or 3. And likewise, after the baby is born, say there's a very difficult birth, they're coming because there's a particular breastfeeding issue, I always want to see both of the couple plus the baby together, because they're all involved in this, both at a physiological level as well as a emotional level. So different attachment styles and the specific words or the specific style aren't as important as that concept of whatever is happening for the mother, that relational style is getting coded into the baby even halfway through pregnancy because of how their autonomic nervous system is developing. So safety and security are really in the deep limbic part of our brain. It's not our thinking brain up on top. It's that unconscious part of our brain that really develops by 18 months. It's very somatic, brainstem and limbic system. How we approach, stay with, or how we avoid, or how we go into distress. So what we're looking at in terms of this is the baby themselves, their constitution, what their soul spirit path is, what they brought in, and also the lineage from the parents, what they brought in. What is the experience in the womb already, or even preconception? What about the parent? What's their current experience, and what's their early experience? And then together, they begin interacting after birth. And out of that comes this feeling, am I safe? Am I lovable? Am I seen? It's not cognitive, it's brainstem, limbic system. And out of that comes both behavior and our physical health, our view of ourself and others, and our perceptions, even our memory of events. So why is this important, and how does this even relate to our adult clients, never mind babies and families? It's because that experience is laying down a template for the rest of our lives in terms of how we relate to ourselves, how we relate to other people, our mechanisms for coping with stress in our life. What's our capacity to learn from our experience? And something that we're understanding more and more and more is it's also our physiological processes. How our cardiovascular system works, how our immune system works, or how we regulate glucose, how we breathe, all are tied in with that experience. It really is the place of mind, body, spirit intersecting, and of course involving our autonomic nervous system and how it functions. So attachment our relationship to other human beings really is that innate motivating force when we, I'll say it this way, choose to take a human body, that there is something about the heart of being human that is seeking and maintaining contact with other human beings. That it's inherent in our basic being self to do that, and how we do that affects everything in our life. And in our culture, you know, this idea that babies at 3 months should be self-soothing, that they should be independent of their mother or their parents, for sure by age 3, is really common. And there's so much talk about babies self-soothing. Actually, they're not really capable of self-soothing. And even as adults, we need contact with other human beings to regulate our nervous system. We really got it wrong in this culture around that, you know, highest value of independence. We all need secure dependence, and it's a balance of being individuated and differentiated and being connected and co-regulated. Even as adults, we all need that kind of back and forth. So we provide that in a certain way when adults come to see us, and when we're working with babies and their family, I really work to support the co-regulation of baby, mom, partner. Because I find even if there's something specific in the cranial base that got malpositioned during the birth, that co-regulation and connection is a powerful place that supports the baby to make the cranial adjustment, as well as my hands on the baby. You know, and most often I always try to, in the first meeting, find a way quite quickly to have my hand behind the mother's heart and have my hand either behind the baby's heart or on the baby's sacrum as I'm getting the information about what happened at the birth. Because right from the beginning, we're creating that relational field. And if all possible, I have the partner sitting on the other side of the mom, and I'm sitting on one side as we just begin that, because that's who's holding this baby all the time, not just in my office. So I'm going to say something about stress, because, you know, we're often talking about, oh, stress is bad for pregnant women. And it's true that really toxic, acute events like 9/11 or other really extreme events do affect a mother-baby with one event, or chronic, long-term, high stress really does affect the baby. But moderate stress in small amounts is actually good for babies, just like it's good for all of us, you know, to rise to the occasion. So I think it's important to reassure pregnant women and their families that, you know, now and then moderate stress is not going to hurt your baby. It's just if it's sustained, you feel that you're helpless, you can't do anything about it, or something really acute. We know that all the women who were pregnant in the Twin Towers, because they've been so researched that they all had a conversion to a hyperreactive hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, and so did their babies when they were born. But when they tested those children at age 3, the moms who had come to terms at some level with what had happened, their babies had converted to a normal HPA axis on their genome. But the women who couldn't come to terms with that and developed various versions of PTSD, their children continued with that hyperreactive HPA axis. So we know that severe stress does change the temperament, that the baby is going to be more irritable when they're born, less consolable. There's lots of research that shows it actually limits the development of the neocortex, which eventually results, even if we don't believe in IQ tests, a reduced ability to learn. And even by age 6 is inhibiting motor skills and the child's ability to concentrate through that HPA axis. So unborn babies, what they're telling us is a calm, relaxed pregnancy results in an easier birth and a calmer, more relaxed baby. It's sort of obvious, but it's not necessarily really taken in by childbearing families, you know, and unborn babies really need their parents to clear up the tension field in their relationship to support their optimal growth. And part of that is learning to name emotions. And we are not psychologists, but even in those few meetings, checking in with the father, I'll say, checking in with the mother, what would support look like for you at home can make a big difference, you know, in those initial moments of our sessions. Just some of that kind of conversation can actually really support families to clear up tension. So I'm going to start talking about oxytocin, the hormone of love. And in a natural labor, oxytocin gradually increases, reaching a peak just before the actual birth. And that's happening in the mom and the baby. And oxytocin helps create those really powerful contractions so that the mom can push the baby out efficiently. And it helps prevent hemorrhage after. And likewise with the baby, it's increasing. And then what needs to happen to further maintain and increase oxytocin in the baby to have an optimal adjustment to the outside world is for the baby to be placed skin to skin on the mama's belly without ever being washed, wiped, moved, having absolutely nothing happen except just getting to rest on the mother's belly. And that actually is the international standard of care from the World Health Organization. The problem is that it's really hard to have that happen in a hospital setting. Even when they have the designation of a baby-friendly hospital and that they're agreeing to this international standard, it's so easy for the slightest little thing to get in the way of that. And if that gets to happen, these oxytocin levels stay very high for at least 4 days, and that entirely supports a good start to the nursing relationship and to the attachment relationship as an outside baby. The other thing that's happening is beta endorphin hormones for pleasure and transcendence are being released during a natural labor, and that is a natural pain relief and inviting feelings of pleasure and connectedness to occur. And they also keep increasing during labor and peak at the time of birth. And they help women enter that altered state of consciousness where they just naturally drop down into a deep somatic place to go with whatever's happening in their body during the labor. And high levels in the mom, and that just enhances that mutual pleasure at the time of birth. And there's also prolactin involved, which also peaks right at birth. Amazing how our bodies are designed, to have that connection if we can be in the natural state. And with fathers or the partner too, these levels, just by being in that field, go up in the partners. And so that increases tender mothering behaviors. And we know now if a father gets to spend 15 minutes alone with his baby in that first week of life, not even skin to skin, but preferably skin to skin, that totally alters their relationship, and that he will naturally spend way more time with that baby over the first year. Isn't that amazing? Just 15 minutes alone, coming into relationship with that new being.
Are you saying 15 or 15?
15. Just 15 minutes alone. Actually beginning, this is you, this is me, we're in relationship here. Opens his heart so much that he wants to keep being with that baby. So prolactin and oxytocin are also the main hormones in breast milk, and that is really important for optimal brain development. And when we begin these types of medical interventions, epidurals, various analgesics like morphine or Demerol, and induction drugs, they completely interfere with this natural release of these hormones and the release time. And so that interferes with the progress of labor and the emotional connections at birth. And we know if women have any of these interventions, the duration of breastfeeding shortens. And it's because that initial connection has been altered in a very neurochemical way. It's so important that on 2 indications of this Brazelton neonatal assessment scale, you can predict the attachment style, the relationship between the baby and the mother at a year. It's, can a full-term baby actually orient to external stimuli? If you ring a little bell, will they follow the bell? You know, that's a measure of the health in their nervous system. Am I able to orient to something outside myself? Because relationship, even with a newborn, is co-created. You know, the baby has to do their part. Their first step in creating that relationship is what we call the breast crawl. You know, after a baby gets to rest here, somewhere 10, 20 minutes, some babies it's even longer, it's a half an hour. As their circulation switches, they get used to being on the outside, they will experience what in cranial terms we sometimes call the birth ignition. There's a pooling and a surge up, expanding what has happened to their cranium during birth. You can sometimes actually literally see their cranium move out to a more optimal position, and then they will initiate what we know as the breast crawl, which is like all mammals. They begin moving around, moving their arms, moving their legs, and literally will crawl up the mother's body and find the nipple through the sense of smell. That's a biologically inherent process that is really important in making that connection. That's the baby's first initial movement to co-creating an attachment relationship, a secure attachment relationship. So if they can orient to the outside, that really helps them to open their eyes and come into connection with their mom. So the other thing is a measure of the state of their autonomic nervous system. Can they be sleeping and wake up and move into a quiet, alert state without going into distress and having major intervention to comfort them? You know, do they need to hear their mother's voice? Do they need to be picked up and rocked? Do they need to be swaddled before they can settle? Do they go, wake up screaming? You know, and we can tell that if they can wake up and move into a quiet, alert state, and then of course if they're hungry, they're going to start crying, saying, come and feed me. That will say, I've had optimal prenatal parenting, and I'm ready to be in the outside world and engage in relationship in a positive way that's going to support my growth. So the next question is, what's the heart got to do with it? You know, and what has this relational branch in our cranial work got to do with it? Well, we know now that approximately 50% of our heart cells are actually neurons, and that our heart is functioning as a brain structure. Some of us might say the heart's the first brain. Kate's going to tell us the gut is the first brain. We won't get into an argument about that. And you know, this brain up on top maybe is number 3. What we know about the heart, though, is it has its own nervous system. It has sensory and motor nerves going to the gut, going to many parts of our body. Our heart knows what's going to happen at much before our brain knows what's going to happen, our brain up on top. And it's directly connected up into our amygdala. Our heart is reading the field before our autonomic nervous system is. And our body's responding to that. Our heart is also major in producing oxytocin. And we know that if a baby, a child, an adult feels nurtured, feels I am safe, I am lovable, they will pick that up in the field and take it in and be able to enhance that feeling, to have that back and forth. If we don't feel safe, we don't feel lovable, which is in place by 3 months, we won't be able to take in or read love coming to us. And I want to pause here because this can seem somewhat fatalistic, right? And thank goodness we also understand now that our genome and our nervous system, our brain, can change at any time based on current experience. So whatever state we were in at 3 months, we're not stuck with it. I just want to, lay that down really clearly. Thank goodness, because most of us have been doing a lot of things since we were 3 months old to rearrange that. At least I know that's true for me. So we need to understand that heart isn't a simple pump. It's not just circulating our blood, and our heart has an electromagnetic field that's really regulating our physiology. And there's some new research just starting to surface in the osteopathic community that maybe is going to delineate the connection between the heart and the vascular system and the cranial system that I'm really excited about. They're just beginning to discover there's a new body system which is being called vascular system. And it's that system is going through our blood, our tissues. It's full of very embryonic looking stem cells and DNA, and who knows, it's highly connected to the system of the cerebrospinal fluid. So I think we might really, over the next who knows how many years, really understand how this is working at a biological level. But what we do know, and it's measurable 3 feet off the body, that the heart actually has the strongest electromagnetic field in the body, and that the mother's heart is regulating the baby's physiology. And that's why skin to skin is so important. Whatever is the situation of a baby coming to see you, I don't want that baby and mom to leave my office without the mom having a way to keep carrying that baby skin to skin on the front of her body, so that the baby's heart is next to the mother's heart. Because whatever else is going on, that's going to support the baby to come into a more optimal, functional, physiological position. It involves temperature, it involves glucose regulation, heart rate, breathing, every physiological indicator. And skin to skin, heart to heart is where the baby really needs to be. And this is where we can really help that if we help the mother come into a coherent heart rate variability, it's not the actual pulse, it's the actual movement of the heart muscle, which is a reflection of, is the autonomic nervous system balanced? Is the autonomic nervous system in a nice sine wave where the sympathetic side comes up, the parasympathetic side goes down, the sympathetic side comes up? You know, it's the gold standard in Western medical research as well. If we're doing some cranial work with the mom, she settles into a coherent heart rate variability, and the baby's within 3 feet of her, hopefully on her chest, skin to skin, while we're doing the work. The baby's physiology will regulate, and things will move in the cranial system that will help the occipital base or anything else that is not in an optimal position for the cranial nerves. It will also help with swelling from the birth. So that's part of what's going on. And the baby will then, and the mother also, sustain more visual attention, more exploration, more creativity. Just everything works better if we're in a coherent heart rate. So there's directly from the heart up to the amygdala, up to the thalamus, that is regulating brain function from our heart. So if there's entrainment, and that's why babies want to stay within 3 feet of their mom, because their mom's heart is regulating them. And, you know, by 9 months, they start crawling away about 9 feet. By 12 months, they're willing to go about 12 feet away. And that second big electromagnetic field is about 12 feet out. So, you know, year-olds will happily maybe even go into the next room if it's really nearby, but they'll want to stay within 12 feet because their heart is, and their mother's heart is still regulating them. And this is what happens to the sine wave. You know, if there's negative emotion, it will be really jagged and not coherent. And if the mother is in a calm, regulated state, it will look like this. And that's where we're going to get optimal regulation in the baby. So, touch and handling, skin to skin. And, you know, it's maybe obvious to all of us, but it's amazing to me how many families come to see me and the baby is always dressed and always in some kind of hard plastic shell. You know, and that is not natural for a baby. A baby needs to be in a carrier on the mother's body for optimal physiology. They actually need lots of skin to skin and physical handling, and that's growing cortisol receptors in their body so that they can deal with stress. And so in my office, I have a stack of different skin-to-skin carriers, and I want to lend one right away. Sometimes I don't get them back, but most often I do. Because if a mom has a newborn who's having difficulty nursing, she's not going to go down to the store and spend $100 on some fancy carrier. And I want her she's got to put the baby in that plastic car seat to go home unless she's walking, but I want her to have that skin-to-skin carrier the minute she gets home. And if I get it back in a month, fine. If I don't, it's not such a big deal. But most often I get them back, and so that she can actually have what she needs to put her baby skin to skin. So those of you that work with babies and mums, I think we need to have that stat, because if we just talk about it and she doesn't get to try it on with some support right here, it's not likely to happen for another 2 or 3 weeks. And that can make all the difference in the world to that baby then successfully latching and nursing. And if we have those partners there, they're really good for skin to skin. There's a Canadian company in Montreal who even makes these great t-shirts for men. They come in black and gray, look just like a regular t-shirt, but on the inside they've got the skin-to-skin carrier for the baby. So if any of you are interested in checking that out, ask me at one of the breaks and I'll tell you the company. So all you needed to know, you really learned before 18 months, and that set your belief about your lovableness, your belief about safety in the world, and your belief as a baby of your parents to protect you. And then that keeps working in us throughout our life. How do we think? How do we remember things? How we feel about ourselves and other people, and even how we evaluate that outside world. And very important that a mom in the last half of pregnancy and the first 6 months, if she's nursing, is the absolutely best time for her to rebuild her brain. And so for us to be able to have the privilege of working with a mom in that time frame, it is like probably double, triple, quadruple the impact at any other time, because the neurohormones of pregnancy and nursing really open up the brain to grow new connections and to reorder. So it's the perfect time for us to be involved, and to be involved with the whole family, both the partner, the mom, the baby. So I really want to encourage all of you that have been in practice for a little while to expand, to work with babies and families, because there is such a need out there. And we all know what's happening with the interventions with birth. It's just more and more and more. And more babies are having big difficulty coming into a nursing relationship. And we have skills and knowledge that can really help that, and can really help parents and their little one get off to a much better start. And so I just want to encourage you to see both partners, to sit with that heart-to-heart connection and hear the birth story, to work with the mom and the baby. And I'll often have a session alone with the partner, because usually so much focus is on the mom's experience and the baby's experience, and that partner has also had an incredible experience. And if it's been really difficult, there's often no place that they get to actually talk through with someone about their own experience. And that's directly affecting the field of the mom and the baby. So thank you, and do come and talk to me about other things.